President Biden early in September hosted the United We Stand Summit. And this summit was to counter some of the hateful and corrosive effects of the hate and violence that we're seeing on our democracy. In addition, the summit honored communities who are healing from many of these hateful attacks, from mass shootings, school shootings, from Oak Creek to Orlando, Charleston, Pittsburgh, Buffalo. You can put your own community in there. And the summit put forth also a vision for a more united America. Well, joining me again is the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, also the president of National Action Network. Rev was there. I saw him in the front row. The president kept calling out your name during this summit. You were one of the ones who were pivotal in putting this together. Why was this necessary?
It was very necessary to me because when I was on my way to do the eulogy of the last of the 10 blacks that were massacred in a hate crime in Buffalo, New York, it occurred to me that over the last several months, we'd seen the killing of blacks in Buffalo by an admitted white supremacist. We saw the shooting of Jews at synagogues in Pittsburgh and in Southern California. We saw killings of Asians, of LGBTQ and Latinos between El Paso and in Florida. And I said that rather than all of us fight this in our individual silos, we need to come together and say that these white supremacists are hitting all of us, and the federal government needs to do more about going after them in advance rather than just mourning after the fact, being in mourning after the fact. So I'm on my way to do the eulogy, on my way to the church in Buffalo. I've done several of the eulogies, but this was the last one. This Whitehead, who was a grandmother. This woman was married for decades, same man ended up in the nursing home, elderly man as she was. And her children told me, said, Reverend Al, she would go every day to the nursing home and feed their father and then go home. And this particular day, she went to the nursing home, fed her husband of decades, stopped by Top Supermarket to get some stuff for her to go home, and this got killed. I mean, I think people just don't understand the human side of it. So I'm on the way to preach her funeral. I called Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, and I told him, I said, I'm on my way to do this funeral. You've had to deal with synagogue, others, the Asian Americans, the LGBTQ, Latino Americans. I said, you and I don't agree on something. You and I have quarreled in the past. But if we all could stand together despite our differences and say to the government, there needs to be more done in the Justice Department and in Homeland Security to get these groups, I think that we can make a difference. He says, I agree, let's do it. We then called the other groups, and 5 of us, National Action Network, National Urban League, ADL, LULAC, and the Asian American Group, wrote a letter to President Biden saying that this is an unprecedented season of white supremacist attacks. We need to have a hate crime commitment. In fact, we need to have a summit that you will come to and deal with this. And Susan Wright, who handles the domestic office for the president, called us and said, let's do it. In fact, not only get the president to come, let's do it at the White House. So that's how it came about. When we went, and we all sat on the first row, the head of Homeland Security announced a new initiative there with funding, as well as the Attorney General Merrick Garland with funding. Vice President Harris opened it up. The president spoke and said that if he can get the Congress to pass his budget, he's put funds in there around this. So I thought it was a start. We've never seen a hate crime summit all day in the White House with commitments of funds that are already in the Justice Department and Homeland Security and funds if the budget is passed. Now, does it solve the problem? No, but it addresses it, and it starts some real efforts out of the Justice Department and Homeland Security to focus on this. And I felt it was a concrete thing that had to be done, and it was.
I think it was important, so important, because just like you said, a lot of times we have these conversations. We always talk, we need to have the conversation. But if there's no conversation and legislation or funding tied to it, then that's all you're doing is talk. That's what I thought kind of set this apart. The initiatives that we saw that even the White House laid out, there are going to be coming through a federal government and organizations working together. And all that the president mentioned, any executive orders that we can kind of see also come out of this.
Yeah, I think that you hit it right. I think that the executive orders, like he did with George Floyd and policing after we couldn't get the legislation through, all of that is significant if it is enforced. The thing that I was most encouraged by is the Justice Department putting money in enforcement, putting money in enforcement in terms of Homeland Security. Because there's no way that I can believe if you have a funded way for federal law enforcement to go after these groups in advance. The white supremacists that killed the 10 in Buffalo had been writing on social media about watch out for something, I'm going to do something. If you have a funded arm in the Justice Department looking for things like this, funded arm in Homeland Security looking for things like this, we may have prevented what he did, because he could have been intercepted, questioned, and the like. So that is why I was happy to see the beginnings of this with money coming out of this, because I can't tell you how traumatic it's been for me, Ebony, in the last 3 or 4 years, just not only the marches that we've had organized, but me preaching the funeral after funeral, looking over these bodies and comforting families. I've been in this all my life, but I've never seen this many this close together. I mean, we've done George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna in Georgia, all of these, at least 10, inside of 2 years. Not to mention the 3 I did out of the 10 in Buffalo, inside of 2 years. And in the middle of a pandemic. You have to remember, we fought George Floyd, but we weren't even supposed to be traveling. So that's why I said, wait a minute, Mr. President, we're in a state of emergency. This is not normal. And to not have the White House do it, which they did, is to normalize like, well, this is just kind of society we in. We can't accept that.
For those who are going to be watching this, I would suggest you also go over to whitehouse.gov to look at some of the initiatives. In addition to that, you've got over 140 mayors that have signed this new bipartisan compact to combat hate and extremism, committing to help fighting violence in their communities. You know, you said you were sitting next to Homeland Security. They put out a report. This isn't the first time. And one of the major issues, the major issue that is happening in the U.S. is white supremacy. It's the violence that's happening. While we have a list of so many other things, if we do not begin to address this issue, like you said, from a legislative point, policy as well, position of policy, then we can expect, right? Don't even be surprised. You can expect to see this begin to tick up. But how are you, as you go to these funerals, how do you even prepare yourself? Because these are lives and families and communities.
It is a good question. One, it is very depressing, and in many ways you have to almost talk to yourself, because I've been doing this all my life, and you say to yourself, how long is this going to happen? And how long do I have to keep having to try to deal with things like this? But then you have to also encourage yourself to say, but if you're not there for these families, and if you don't try and put whatever you can behind it, they're going to suffer, and you could have done something to help them. So it's not like these people don't need us to stand with them. So that's what makes me go on, is that, I come out of the Martin Luther King School of activism, and I remember reading when I was very young. Dr. King said something that stood with me, that he was asked to go to a certain city, and I'm not comparing myself to King, but I'm a student of his philosophy. But he was asked to go to a certain city, and he said he was tired. Had gone and stretched himself so. And he said that then there were threats that if he goes, that he might be harmed in some way. And he said to himself, if I don't go, what will happen to them? If I do go, what will happen to me? But if I don't go, what will happen to them? And he went in here, how? And I think that I grew up, because as a teenager, I joined his northern chapter. And I think that's what drives me. If I don't go, will they get the kind of attention and the kind of support National Action Network can give, even though it's messing with me to keep having to go? If I don't go, it probably would mess with me even more.
Woo. That's a heavy note to end on, Rev. I just want to thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, and how you sustain yourself, I don't know. But, you've got a community that has your back. Thank you for joining me again on this platform, this Black-owned platform, to talk about these vital issues. Can't wait to see you at Congressional Black Caucus Foundation weekend. I know you're telling it like it is there.
All right. I'll be looking for you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Ebony. Thank you.